up to Perek Yud Zayin, and the end of the preceding Perek, we find that Shaul is prone to depression, to sadness, despondency. The spirit of Hashem has left him, and that creates unbearable pain. And that pain was relieved by David HaMelech playing the harp. Now again, Shaul does not know that David has been anointed king. David does not talk about it. David does not tell him. The Perek continues. Vayasvu Pelishtim es machaneim la milchama. Right, the Philistines are our big enemy throughout this period, and they are arranging their camps for a milchama. Vayasvu socho asher liYehuda, and the Pelishtim are gathering in an area called Socho, in the Chelik of Eretz Yisrael that belongs to Yehuda. This is south of Yerushalayim, around the Dead Sea. Vayachanu bein Socho ubein Azeka biefes damim, and their camp is arrayed in the area between the town of Socha and Azeka, in a stretch of territory that is called Efes Damim. Efes Damim literally means the absence of blood. Perhaps this is a siman that no Jew will be harmed here, but Rashi says it is simply a shame makom. V'Shaul v'Ish Yisrael nesfu, and Shaul and his own army are gathering. V'Yachnu b'Emek ha'Ela, they are encamped in the valley of Elah. V'Yarchu milchama likras Plishtim, and they are ready to wage war against the Plishtim. Uplishtim omdim elahor mizeh v'Yisrael omdim elahor mizeh v'agai beinayim, and the Plishtim are on top of one hill, and the Jews are on top of another hill, and there's a valley between them. So it's army against army, but they have not yet engaged in battle. Vayetze ish ha-beinayim mimachanos Pelishtim, and a man emerged from the middle of the camps of the Pelishtim. Goliath Shemo, his name was Goliath, right? This is the famous Goliath. Migas, he was from the Philistine city of Gas. Govo sheish amot v'zeres, his height was 6 amos, and a zeres is a handbreadth. Now again, what an amma is between 1.5 feet and 2 feet. So multiply that by 6, you're either talking about 9 feet or 12 feet. He was quite a giant. And a zeres is a hand's breadth. V'kaiva necheshes al reishai, he wore a copper helmet. V'siryain kaskasim hu lavush, and he's wearing chainmail, like scales of copper armor. Umishkal hashiryain chameshes alafim shkolim necheshes. The weight of the armor he was wearing was 5,000 shekel. Shekel here is a weight, not a value of coin. So he was so strong and so big that his armor was a huge weight. Umitzchas necheshes al raglav, and he wore protective armor on his legs, on his knees. V'chidon nechoshes bein keseifav, and there was another bar of nechoshes, of copper, across his shoulders, on top of the chainmail. V'eitz chaniso, and his spear, right, the wooden part of the spear, right, the wood had a sharp spear at the edge of it, but the wooden thing itself was a thick beam. Kimenor or gim was like the beam of a loom, of a weaver. V'laheves chaniso, and the sharp tip of the spear. Sheish meos shkolim barzal, 600 shkolim of iron. V'neisei hatzina hailech lefanav, and in front of him there was a man who carried a shield. So Goliath is a giant with armor, with weapons, tremendous power. And we have the two armies on different hills. Vayamod vayikra el marchos Yisrael, and he comes out and he calls out to the armies of Am Yisrael. Vayomer lahem, and he says to them, Lama teitzu laroch milchama, why do you want to bother to have war? We're going to decimate you anyway. Hello, anoichi aplishti, I am one Philistine. V'yatem avodim l'Shaul, and you are slaves to a Shaul, to a puny guy, a little guy. Baru lachem ish v'yerid alai. Choose one man to fight me. It'll be a 1 against 1, and that will determine the victory. Im yuchal lilachem iti v'ikani. If he defeats me, hayinu lachem li'avadim. We will be slaves to you. V'yamani uchalo. But if I win, v'hikisiv, and I smite him, hayisim lanu li'avadim. You will be our servants, our slaves. V'yavadatem osanu, and you will serve us. In other words, let's not bother with a war where a lot of people can die. Let's have a 1-on-1. And the 1-on-1, the duel, will decide it. Vayomer haplishti. And the Philistine repeated, Ani cheiravti es marchos Yisrael hayom hazeh. I am degrading and cursing the armies of Israel. I dare you to fight me. Tenuli ish, give us one person, we will fight together. Vayishma Shaul v'chol Yisrael es divrei haplishti. And when Shaul and the whole Jewish army hear the words of this Philistine, ha'ela, vayechatu, they are broken in spirit. Vayiru ma'od, they are very frightened because they feel there's nobody that can defeat Goliath. So in effect, they're set up for failure, and the Pelishtim will rule over them. Now, David ben Ish Ephrati Hazemi Beis Lechem Yehuda. David is the son of an Ish Ephrasi. Now, Ephrasi does not mean Shevet Ephraim, but it simply means, Rashi brings, that Beis Lechem was in a territory of Yehuda that was called Ephrat. So a man from Ephrati means a man from Beis Lechem. Others say Ephrat means someone who's very distinguished. His name was Yishai, and Yishai had 8 sons. V'yoish b'mei Shaul zakein. And Yishai, in the days of Shaul, was already a very old person, Boa ba Nashim, and he was very distinguished. Again, this pasuk is very shver in pshat, because the pasuk seems to imply that we are meeting Yishai for the very first time, when in fact Yishai was already introduced in the preceding perek, and David HaMelech was anointed. So this pasuk seems to be l'chayra very, very shver here. The Mefarshim don't really give such good terutzim. Vayelchu shleishes b'nei Yishai agdailim, and the 3 oldest sons of Yishai, they were with Shaul in this milchama. And as we said before, again, this is something we actually know as well. Why is it repeated? V'shem shleishes banav asher holchu b'milchama. The name of his 3 sons, Eliav is the Bechor, Mishneu Avinadav, Hashlishi Shama. So 3 sons are with Yishai, are with Shaul in this milchama. The other sons aren't there, and David in particular is grazing the sheep. Right? That's what he's always doing. The David Akatan, David is the youngest. Ushleisha Gdailam Holchu Achrei Shaul, the 3 oldest are with Shaul. The David Holech v'shav miyal Shaul liros of sonaviv. Now, even though David was already in the employ of Shaul to be his musician, but he left Shaul to take care of his father's sheep. So Shaul does know David, but David took a leave of absence from royal service to take care of the sheep, I guess because 3 of the brothers were drafted, so David needed to take care of the sheep. Vayigash haplishti hashkeim v'harev. The Philistine went forth with his threat and his demand and his mocking every morning and every evening for 40 days. Yisyatsev arboim yom. Vayomer Yishai leDavid b'nai. So at some point, this is like a standoff. The armies are simply in place for 40 days. Nobody's doing anything. Vayomer Yishai leDavid b'nai. So Yishai now tells David his son, Kach na liachecha ephas hakoli hazeh. Bring food to your brothers. They're probably lacking food. Bring them an ephah, a measure of parched grain. Asara lechem hazeh, 10 loaves of bread. V'haretz hamachaneh liachecha, and run to the army camp to give this food to your brothers. V'yes aseres charitzei achalav ha'ela tavi l'sara elef. And in addition, bring a gift to the general of 10 cheeses. Again, this was a gift, hopefully that the general would treat Yishai's sons in a good way. And es achecha tifkaid l'shalom. See how your brothers are doing. Okay, now this last expression is very, very interesting. Es arubasam tikach. Take their guarantees. Aruba comes from arev, which is a guarantor. Take their aruba, take their guarantees. So what is this referring to? So we have a machlokas. According to Pashut Pshat, the brothers borrowed money to buy food, and they had to give collateral. They had to give their clothes or garments for collateral, and that is called an arubah, collateral for a loan, like a pawn shop. And Yishai is telling David, go and redeem their collateral. In other words, whatever they put up to borrow money, pay off the debts and give them back their collateral. So in addition to the food, give them back the collateral that was taken away from them when they borrowed money or they bought food on credit and the like. That is Lefi Pshuto Shel Mikra. The Gemara, however, has another interpretation, and this is the source of the famous teaching that David HaMelech himself practiced, that every soldier that was in David HaMelech's army would give a get to their wives, so in the event that they would be missing in action, and we do not know if they were dead or alive, their wives would be permitted to marry, and they would not be agunot. Now, although the Gemara initially seems to say that this was a takana of David HaMelech, in fact, the proof that it brings was it was practiced before David HaMelech's time. The Baal HaTurim says even in Moshe's time, but at least the pasuk here is, because this is what Yishai is saying. Yishai is saying, Aruba means the get, meaning the collateral, so to speak, that would guarantee that the wives would not be in aguna. In other words, he's saying, be sure to pick up the gittin from your brothers so their wives can be properly divorced in case they're missing in action. So that's a drash in the Gemara itself. Now, V'shol v'hema v'chol ish Yisrael b'emek ha'ela nilchamim in Plishtim. Shaul is waiting in the valley. Actually, it's a little shver because before it says they're in the mountain facing the valley. So you have to say Emek means the har adjacent to the Emek. And when it says they're fighting with the Philistines, it does not mean they're fighting because they're not fighting, but they're awaiting milchama. Vayashkem David b'bayker. David gets up in the morning. Vayitosh esatzon al shomer. He leaves his sheep with a shomer, with a guardian. Vayisa vayelech asher tzivo Yisha. He takes all the food that Yisha had commanded him. Vayavay hamagala, and he comes to the place where the armies are gathered. V'achaya layayse el maracha. V'heireyu b'milchama. There's a lot of tumult, a lot of shouting because people are getting ready for war. V'tarach Yisraelu plishtim maracha l'kras maracha, and the two armies are arranged directly opposite each other. Each one is on a mountaintop or a hilltop, facing the valley. Vayitaish David es hakelim. David took off all of the stuff that he was carrying. Al yad shomer hakelim. He gave it to the custodian. Vayaretz hamaracha. He went to see what's going on here. He sees there's a lot of tumult, a lot of confusion, a lot of milling around. Vayavai vayishal liachiv l'shalom, and he asks to see how his brothers are doing. V'hu medaber imam, and while he's talking to his brothers, hine ish habeinayim, this man from the middle of the Philistines, Goliath, Eila, he gets up, Goliath haplishti shmo, migas, from Gas, mimarchos plishtim, from the Philistine army, v'yadaber kadvar ma'ela, and he says what he says, that let one of you fight me, vayishma David, and David hears it for the first time. V'chol ish Yisrael birosa meso ish, and every person that even saw Goliath, v'anusu mipanav, They ran away from him. Vayiru ma'od, and they were very frightened. They knew there was no way any one of them could beat him. Vayomer ish Yisrael, and each person said, Hari isem ha'ish ha'ela hazeh, do you see this man that's coming up against us? Ki l'charef es Yisrael ola, he is coming to blaspheme and curse us. And v'haya ha'ish, now here the first time we were aware of a deal that Shaul had made. Shaul had said the following thing: Haya ha'ish asher yakenu, any man that can smite and defeat Goliath, Yashrenu hamelech oisher gadol. Number one, the king will give him great wealth. Number two, esbito yiten lai, the king will give his daughter in marriage. Number three, esbeis aviv yaseh chofshi b'Yisrael, and his father's home shall become free in Eretz Yisrael. And the Pashtus, this means permanent tax exemption, meaning to say they will be exempt from taxes. So this is what the king said: Oisher Gadol, my daughter, your family gets a tax exemption. Vayomer David el ha'anashim omdim, and David said to all the people that's around him, Lamar, Ma yeyoseh lo ish asher yakeh haplishti haloz. What shall be done to the man who will smite this Philistine? V'heser cherpa miyal Yisrael, and he will remove this shame from Am Yisrael. Ki mi haplishti oral hazeh. Who is this Plishti, this uncircumcised oral? Ki cheref marches elokim chayim, that he blasphemes and he curses the army of the eternal God. Now, he had not yet heard what people were saying about the wealth and about the daughter, and now they tell him, Vayomer lo ha'am kedavar hazeh leimar. And indeed they told him, Ko yaseh leish asher yakenu, this is what's going to be done. The king will give great wealth, he'll marry his daughter, and the family will be pater from mas. So Eliav, David's older brother, is hearing that David seems to be talking about getting involved with Goliath, and Eliav is irritated. David is a kid, what is he getting involved? Again, it's a little strange. Eliav already knows that David is anointed, but still, he does not have respect for him. Vayishma Eliav achif hagadol b'dabro l'anoshim. When Eliav, David's oldest brother, hears that David is speaking to people about Goliath, Vayicharaf Eliav b'David, Eliav is very furious. Vayomer lama zeyaradata. Why did you come here? You're not even supposed to be here. Go back to the sheep. V'almina tashta miyadat zayin. Who did you leave the sheep with? Hahena b'midbar in the desert. Ani yadati es adoncha v'yasraya levavecha. I know that you're a person of bad character who shirks his duty. Ki leman reis ha-milchama yaradata. Of course, David went because Yishai told him to go. Kibud aviyim. But Eliav, who probably knows this, says, you came because you're a curiosity seeker. You're a publicity seeker. You want to see what's going on. You want to see the war. Vayomer David. But David says, what did I do? Halai davaru, I'm here for an important reason. Vayisav meyetzlei. And David turns away from Eliav, who is disparaging him, el mul acher, to face another person. Vayomer kedavar zeh, and David says, I think something has to be done about Goliath. Somebody has to answer the accusation. Vayishivu ha'am davar kedavar rishon. And people said, well, yes, the king will give all of these things, but nobody wants to volunteer. Vayishamu hadvarim asher diber David. And David was saying, somebody has to stand up. And these words were spread. V'yagidu lifnei Shaul. And eventually, the words reached Shaul. Vayikocheyo. And Shaul summoned David to him. Now again, this is not the first time Shaul meets David. David is already Shaul's musician and arms bearer. Vayomer David el Shaul. And David now gives Shaul a message. Al yipol lev adam alav. Do not be afraid. Avdecha yelech. Your servant, I will go. V'nilcham ima plishti hazeh. I will fight the Philistine. Vayomer Shaul el David. And Shaul says to David, Lo yisuchal lalechas ela plishti hazeh lilachem imai. You cannot fight this giant Goliath. Ki narata. You are still a young man. Of course, David is not so young. He's 28 years old. Vu ish milchama min nurav. Goliath has been a warrior from the time he was a young man. So besides the fact that he's a giant and besides the fact that he has phenomenal strength, he is ragil in milchama. He knows how to use weapons. He knows how to kill. He knows how to decimate. You are not a man of war. You don't know the skill. He will crush you. Vayomer David el Shaul. And David says to Shaul, I'm not as inexperienced as you might think. Raya haya avdecha liyaviv batzayin. I was a shepherd for my father. And sometimes wild animals would attack the sheep. Ubaha ari v'yasadayv. There were lions, these are like mountain lions, and bears. V'nasa sem yoeder, and sometimes they would take a sheep alive, which they were planning to kill. V'yatsasi achrav, and I would run after the lion and the bear. V'hikisiv, and I would kill the lion and the bear. V'hitzalti mipiv, and I saved the lamb from the lion and the bear. V'yakom alai, and when the lion and the bear tried to attack me, echzakti b'zikano, I grabbed it by the hair of its chin. V'hikesiv, and I smote it. V'hamitiv, and I killed it. Gam esari, gam adai fika avdach, I was able to kill lions and bears. V'haya haplishti ha'orel hazeh ki achad mehem. And this Philistine, this uncircumcised, again, derech bizayon, this orel of a Philistine, will be like the lion and the bear. Ki cheref marchais elokim chayim, because he is blaspheming and cursing the army of Hashem that lives, the eternal God. Vayomer David, and now David davens, Hashem asher hitzalti hitzilani miyado ari miyad adayv, the Eibishter that saved me from the ari and the dayv. Hu yatzileni miyad plishti hazeh, he will save me from this Philistine. Vayomer Shaul el David, and Shaul was convinced. Lech, you may go. V'Hashem yiyeh imach, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be with you. Vayalbe Shaul es David madav, and Shaul dressed David with all of the armor of Shaul. V'nasan kaiva necheshes al reishai, and he put a copper helmet on his head. V'yalbesh also shiryain, and he dressed David with chainmail. Vayachgor David es charbo mi'alam madav, and on top of all of the clothes, David girded himself with a belt and had the sword on the side. Vayayel lalechas, but he refused to go. David did not want to wear all of this armor. It was too big, it was too heavy. Kilo nisa, he was not used to all this baggage. Vayomer David el Shaul, and David said to Shaul, Lai uchal laleches ba'ela. I cannot fight Goliath wearing chainmail and armor and a heavy sword. Kilo nisisi, I am not used to fighting that way. That's not the way I dealt with the Ari and the Daiv. Vayisirem David me'alav, and David removed it. Vayikach makloi biyadai. All he did was take a stick. Vayivchar loi chamisha chalukei avanim min hanachal. He took 5 smooth stones from the river. Vayosem osam bichli harayim. He put it in his pouch that shepherds typically carried, asher lo, ubiyalkut in this case. The kilo biyadai. Kilo is the slingshot. Vayigash al Plishti, and he approaches the Philistine. Vayelech Plishti holech v'karev el David, and the Philistine finally sees that somebody's approaching him, so the Philistine moves towards David. V'yoish nosei atzino lefanav, and in front of Goliath is a man holding that shield. Vayabed Plishti, and the Philistine stares. Vayiras David, and he sees David. Vayivzu, and he's mavaza him. Ki hayanar, David is a young man, admaini, with a ruddy complexion. Im yefei mara, a pretty boy. Vayomer haplishti el David, akelev aneichi. You're treating me like a dog. Ki ata bo elai b'maklesh, you're going to chase me away with a stick. You don't even have a weapon. What chutzpah, what effrontery. Vayikalel haplishti es David bei loyhav. And the Philistine cursed David, Elohav Ischol, with the name of his God. In other words, the name of Avodah Zarah. Vayomer Plishti el David, and the Philistine said to David, L'chai lai, come towards me. V'yetnes besarcha li'ayf hashamayim v'lebehemas asada, and I will kill you and give your corpse to the vultures, to the birds of the heaven, and to the animals on earth. Vayomer David ala Plishti, and David says to the Philistine, Ata bo elai b'cherev u'b'chanis u'b'kidon. You come to me with swords and with spears and with helmets. Aneichi bo elecha, with something even better. B'shem Hashem tzavakos Elokei marchos Yisrael asher chayravta. I don't need swords, I don't need spears, I don't need helmets. I come with the power coming from Hashem, who is the God of the armies of Israel, that you have blasphemed. Hayom hazeh, this very day, Yasgercha Hashem biyodi, God will deliver you into my hands. V'hi kisicha, I will smite you. V'hasiresi es reishcha mi'alecha. So David HaMelech is not being ambiguous here. I will cut off your head. V'nasati peger machane plishta miyom hazeh liofa shemayim alachayas oretz, and your peger, your corpse, in the camp of the Philistines, will be li'ayf hashamayim, and the chayas haaretz, vayedu kol haaretz ki yesh elokim liyisrael, and everyone will know that there is a God in Israel that protects us. Vayedu kol hazeh, and everyone will know, both the Plishtim and Am Yisrael, ki loy b'cherev u'v'chanis yahoshia Hashem, that Hashem does not need to save us with swords and with spears. Ki Lashem hamilchama, all victory comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'nasan eschem biyodenu, he will deliver you. Eschem is plural now. All of the Philistines will now be conquered by us, because that's the deal, right? If Goliath is defeated, the Plishtim will be avodim to us. V'haya, so now we're back to the event. Ki kama Plishti v'yelech v'yikrav l'kras David. The Philistine got up and drew near to David. V'yamayer David v'yaretz hamaracha l'kras Plishti, and David runs closer and closer to Goliath. V'yishlach David es yadai ala keli. David puts his hand into his case, his briefcase, his bag. V'yikach misham even. He takes one stone. He doesn't even need 5. V'yikala, and he puts it into the slingshot. Vayach es Plishti el Mitzchay, and the stone, right, one of the most famous scenes in Tanakh, the stone hits the Plishti in his forehead. Only one stone. Vatitba ha'even b'Mitzchay, and it went deep into his head. Vayipal al panav arza, and he fell on his face. Again, technically he should have fallen on his back. Rashi brings a medrash that Hashem wanted to save David the tircha. If Goliath would have fallen backwards on his back, David would have to go Goliath's whole height in order to cut off his head. This way he fell forward. That shortened the distance for David HaMelech. And David gained control of the Philistine with the slingshot and the stone. When he killed him, David didn't even have a sword. But what then happened was, Vayoretz David v'yamad el Plishti. After Goliath was killed, he stood near the body. Vayikach escharba. He took Goliath's own sword. Vayishlofa mitara. He took it out of its sheath. Vayimoseseyo, and he killed him. Yeah, so again, it's mashma. Okay, it's a little confusing. Here the pasuk is mashma that the stone did not kill him. The stone knocked him over, and he was either unconscious or woozy. And David took Goliath's sword and killed him with the sword, not with the stone. Vayichras ba'es reisha. He cut off his head. Vayiru haplishtim. And the Philistines saw ki meis boram, that their hero, their mightiest person, had been killed by this young man. Vayanusu, and they ran away in retreat. Vayakumu anshe Yisrael v'Yehuda v'Yariu, and they shouted with joy. Vayirdefu es haplishtim, and they pursued the Philistine army. Ad boach Hagai, till they came to the place of Gai. V'ad sharei Ekrain, the gates of Ekrain. Vayiplu, so it turned into a battle. Vayiplu chalalei plishtim baderech sha'arayim v'ad gas v'ad Ekrain. The road, all along the road, which is called the road of Sharayim, until the cities of Gas, until the cities of Ekron, that are Philistine cities. There were casualties and corpses of the Philistines all along these roads. Vayashuvu b'nei Yisrael midlok achar plishtim, and when b'nei Yisrael finished pursuing the Philistines, vayashoisu es machaneim, they plundered their camps, they took spoils, food and gold and silver and clothing and animals. Vayikach David es rosh haplishti. But David took the head of Goliath, the head that he had severed, Vayaviyehu Yerushalayim, and he brought it to Yerushalayim as almost a memento. V'es kelev sam bi'alo, and Goliath's weapons David kept in his own tent. V'chiros Shaul es David yotzei likras haplishti. Now, this goes backwards a little bit. Very schwer. When Shaul sees David going out to fight with Goliath, Omar el Avner sar hatzava, he says to Avner, who is Shaul's general, he is also Shaul's cousin. Avner's father and Shaul's father are brothers. Ben mi ze hanar Avner. Whose son is this? Vayomer Avner, Chei nafshecha hamelech. I swear by the life of the king, im yodati. I'll come back to this. Vayomer Hamelech. So the Melech tells Avner, if we don't know who this kid is, Sha'al ata ben miza ha'elam. Who is the son of whom is this young man? So again, obviously this is a pella. Obviously, Shaul knows who David is. He spoke to Shaul. He spoke to David. David was his arms bearer. David was his musician. So the Gemara in Yevamos explains that certainly 100% Shaul knows who this is. But when Shaul put on his armor, now remember, Shaul was Mishichmo Lamaila. Shaul was very tall. David was not so tall. And somehow the begadim of the Melech fit David. Even though David didn't want them. And David said, take them off. But those begadim fit him. And Shaul doesn't understand, how could these big begadim fit David HaMelech? Unless somehow Shaul begins to intuit that there's a malchus here. And he said, let's be baidek his yichus. Doesn't Yishai come from Rus? Isn't there a problem here? Isn't there a pickbook here? Meaning that's what Shaul is trying to do, to perhaps discredit him from being a melech. So, again, this is not Lefi Pshuto Shal Mikra. Uchshuv, David mi'akaisas haplishti, and after David killed Goliath, Vayikachasau Avner, Avner took him, v'yaveil lifnei Shaul, he brought him to Shaul, v'reish haplishti biyadai, and the head of Goliath was in his hands. Vayomer elav Shaul ben mi'atanar. Whose son are you? Now again, very, very schwer. He knows this, but Shaul is trying to be baidek into the yichus of Rus. Vayomer David ben Avdecha Yishai Beis Halachmi. I am the son of Yishai from Beis Lechem, and ultimately this means my yichus is fine. Again, Chazal darshan that the word Elam, which means young man, is also a lashon of He'elem, that Shaul was ignorant, or the halacha that the descendants of the female Moabite are mutter was concealed from Shaul, that he wanted to disqualify David from being a melech. So this is the end of Perek Yud Zayin.